And so on that note, Todd, help us understand where our files go for all of these different Teams UI scenarios.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, I don't think they do.
It's just.
And on that note, we should get started. Okay, it's February 19th. We are doing part 2 of effective document management strategies for Microsoft 365. Today, we're going to do the Teams edition. We have everyone but Carrie today. She is out, so we don't have her insights, but everybody else is here. Okay, so what are we going to do today? We're going to, similar to last week, we're going to do a similar format. We're going to sort of state the problem specific to Teams. Then we want to address the where are my files, because that is a big part of being in the Teams UI versus being in SharePoint. So we'll address that. And then we have some scenarios just like we did last time. So we have default documents library, which is sort of similar. And then we have folders and channels that we're going to address. Additional libraries, similar idea, but how do they surface? And I will do a very small little maturity model, 500, level 500 type of overview at the very end. So the document management problem statement. So first, we thought it'd be a good idea to just say what is Teams, because I feel like when I get on client calls all the time, I feel like I often repeat this. So I think it's good for us to repeat it. So how do we think about Microsoft Teams team versus a SharePoint team site? And I think one of the things that's oft misunderstood is from a security perspective, a Microsoft 365 Modern group backs both the Microsoft Teams team and the SharePoint team site. And yes, there's a little asterisk on the SharePoint team site because you could have an old one that doesn't have backed by a Modern group. But let's just start there and say the SharePoint, a Modern SharePoint team site and a Microsoft Teams team are both backed by a Microsoft 365 group. It is the same group. So when you create a Microsoft Teams team, it automatically creates a SharePoint team site to go with it. And the security for both of those things is that Microsoft 365 group. So then what is a channel? In many cases, a channel is a place, well, in Teams UI, it is a place where we can have conversations, essentially, but it also creates a place for storing documents. And Derek or Patrick actually will go into a little bit more explanation on that. And so then there is the private channel. So there's a public channel that's part of the group. And then there's the idea of a private channel. If you have a private channel, that changes things. It's a way to segment out some of the members and owners of the team and make a separate private area for them to work. And what that means behind the scenes is that a new hidden SharePoint site has been created that is secured to just those people that you put in the private channel. So it's important to understand that there is this other SharePoint site, and it's different from the way the team site and the Microsoft Teams team sort of link together. And then the last thing is a shared channel, which is sort of the newest of the channels. And what that is a way for you, it's a way for you to share channels with external users and allow them to maintain that visibility for that team and channel in their own Teams UI without having to change tenants. And so I've given you sort of a visual here where it's showing that I had a team shared with me and all the teams around it are ones in our tenant, but the one from the where I was added to a shared channel in another tenant shows up in my teams right in order with all the other teams, and it just shows as being external. And you can see that sort of at VE part of it. It says what tenant it is right under the channel name. So it's kind of I actually kind of like it. I for one-off cases where you're going to share it with an external user and you only have that one channel to share with them to collaborate on something, it's really nice to not have to change tenants to get to that. And so then the last question we're going to sort of talk about is where are my files, or the first question actually we're going to address is where are my files stored. And so on that note, Todd, help us understand where our files go for all of these different Teams UI scenarios.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, I don't think they do.
it's just no, nobody knows. No, so we've got all these different teams that Julie talked about. And just yesterday, Julie, I was on a client call where I had to do the whole, well, you've got a Teams team, and that creates a team site with the, and the guy's like, wait,
right.
What? Yes, Microsoft used the same word for all of the
So
things.
now we could just take this recording and just be like, please wait and play this section of the recording so we don't have to keep repeating ourselves.
It's not as bad as Forms, though, is it?
Yeah.
It's actually it's almost as, it's worse. It's worse.
Yeah. Okay. So if you were in a Teams team, so that was the first thing that Julie talked about. When anybody uploads a file, it goes into that Teams site, document library, and then a subfolder or a folder with the channel name. So they start out generally in general, because that's the name of the main channel. But if you create other channels, they will show up in there. So one of the things that did, and Anderson, I'm going to cue up your rant on this, is that completely breaks the ability to use that shared document library for anything else, because anytime anybody creates a channel, it creates a folder. And yeah, it just
you don't want to have a general folder before you connect to Teams either.
Yes. So okay, and so Caleb's saying it's not called general anymore unless you choose to name it. Okay.
It is by default. By default, it's still general.
Yeah. Not in our tenant.
No, not anymore.
When you create a team, it asks you, what do you want to name your first channel?
If you go next. If you go next, it just creates general. I've never looked at that, but anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So general, and that makes the IA even worse. You can't even depend on it being called general anymore because it's now going to be anything else. So that's a Teams team, just going into Teams, making some chats and all that. Now, Julie talked about there are different kinds of channels. A special type is a private channel. And if you create a private channel, that creates another SharePoint site with a template of team channel #0 or team channel #1. I can't remember which it is. There, the documents get uploaded to the document library, but not in a folder, because this is the only channel that can be there. So it just puts them in the root of the document library. And those can't be shared outside of the team members. So you can add more team members to the private channel, but you can't share like you're normally used to sharing, because again, it's a special one-off web template, site template. So conversations follow all those same rules. So everything I just said follows conversations. If you're doing a one-on-one chat and you upload a file to that one-on-one chat, whoever uploaded the file goes in their OneDrive in a folder called Teams Shared Files or something like that. I forget exactly the name of it, but it's on the OneDrive of whoever uploaded the file. And then after the file gets uploaded there, then Teams automatically shares it out, and so that everybody in that chat can get access to it.
I love it.
So there'll be a short quiz at the end of this episode. So I hope you all got that.
It's sort of like that. It's sort of like that scam where they've got the 3 cups and there's a bean underneath. Like
the 3-card money.
Where's your file? Where's your file?
Yeah. And furiously, Patrick's putting a quiz together for the end. All right. So the team scenarios that we're going to talk through in a little more detail is, so that defaults document library experience, everything in the general folder or whatever. So we'll talk through that first, and Patrick's going to address that. And then Teams channels for organizing files, so folders and document libraries, and how you might think of through that. And then Mark and Derek is going to handle that. And then last, Mark is going to handle that if you do additional document libraries like we talked about last time, and now you're in Teams, what does that look like and how do you think about that? So we'll definitely address all of those. All right. Do we have any questions in the chat? I think they're getting answered. Okay, I don't need to address. All right. So let's start with Patrick and talk about default document library.
Yes, default document library. So this is the out-of-the-box document library when you create a new Teams. We've been discussing whether it's called General or the Bitbucket or whatever you want to call it. As Caleb noted there, this is general level 100 maturity, so you're just into Teams. We've all done this. The question we always ask is you're chatting back and forth or you're posting back and forth and someone asks for a file and you put a file in the post and all of a sudden you go, where is it? So when you go up to the Files tab at the top, there's a document library there, one document library. And that is where it all goes. So that's kind of the nice thing about it is it's easy in the sense that it's ready to go. It's just out of the box. It's centralized location. So anything that gets posted to that team goes into that one library. Permissioning is very easy because whoever has permissions to the team has permission to see any of the documents there.
Full permissions too. They can delete things, they can edit things and everything, right?
Right. Could we have cons to that? Maybe someone wants some organization, some IA. Yeah, not going to happen here. You can have some organization added to it. You can create folders, you can do all those things, but it's a little bit more of a lift for the people who own or work in the team because they'll actually have to take those documents and move them into the spots where they want them if they want to provide any of that. Findability. So, you've been working on a project for 3 months and you're like, I know we sent this document and oh, wait, now we have 200 documents here and it's going to take some time to find it. So the more documents you have in the single library, of course, it's going to be harder to actually locate the one you're looking for. So I put that as a con. There's no metadata. There's nothing other than, your basic information attached to these documents when you upload them. So
should you apply content types to that document library, Patrick? Would that solve the problem?
No.
Not particularly.
No, because you just have the one library. So, I mean, could you put a content type in with the name of the team perchance, and then it would be Team A document? Yes, you could. I don't know how helpful that would be in the long run because
not at all.
You're going to have every type of document under the sun, whether it's a screenshot or a Word doc or Excel, PowerPoint, it's all run together. So there's no way to easily identify what is what without some hand-holding on the owners of the site and being able to do that. But I think that is a great segue into one easier way to start doing that. And I'm going to hand that over to Derek.
Yes, for sure. I did have one more point that I wanted to make on the sort of cons on this is when you get to that tab, the Files tab, I think one of the other very confusing things that I find users struggling with is that the Files tab is dropping you into that channel's folder, which seems like a really good thing. And if you're using it at very limited maturity, that's great. But if some people are working in the SharePoint team site and some people are working in Microsoft Teams, there is a confusion because you're navigated down into the folder. And so the people in the Teams UI are like, oh, all my documents are right here and I'm just using them. And the people that are in SharePoint are like, all my files are right here in the root, not in the general folder. And if they don't understand that connection, you're essentially going to get a lot of confusion. Well, I put the file there. Well, I don't see the file. Well, that's because they didn't put it in the general. Now you can navigate up because there's a little breadcrumb at the top in the Teams UI, but it's still super confusing, like what that difference is. All right. So as Patrick said, let's segue in. Derek, talk to us about what else we can do.
So I was thinking about sort of how you can take this like one little step further. And I wanted to break this out really into two different options here. The first being just still using the general channel, using the default document library, and just creating folders in that particular location. The next option would be creating different channels for each sort of, say, phase of your project or logical organization points. And you can see the two different scenarios here. The first one on the left is just different folders. They're inside general. There's the breadcrumb that Julie was mentioning earlier, where you can navigate up to documents. And then on the right-hand side is a different channel for each different phase of the project. And if you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about each one.
Yes, but I was having fun with the laser pointer.
You were. So
I felt like a cat. I kept wanting to bat at it.
So realistically, I mean, this is, if you have a small team, if you're sort of a nimble organization, like having a small uniform set of folders for, say, a project is totally okay, right? If that's where your organization is at and it facilitates your business, that is perfect. You just create different folders. And then you just need to make sure that your team members know which folder stuff goes into, right? We have certain folders that we put contracts in, and that's where they go, and that's where they live, and everybody sort of knows that. Some of the pros for this is that it is a familiar folder structure for users, right? We do a lot of file share migrations, and people love their folders. They love that organizational, like that safety net that they have about knowing exactly where their stuff is. It organizes stuff in logical spaces. I find this works best with organizations that have a lower technical literacy level, or organizations that are very small and nimble, and where there's not a lot of training that needs to happen, right?
Or content for that matter, right?
Well, or content for that matter. Yeah, it gets really overwhelming. When Patrick was talking about his scenario, where it gets very overwhelming if you've got 50 documents in there. And I would argue 50 is probably pushing it. We're really more talking about maybe 20, and it really depends on what you're doing. If you've got a boat ton of reports, that's challenging. Some of the cons here is that it can easily replicate bad structures of file shares. And you can see in the image on this screen, I added a couple of folders. We've got Dave's folder, and we've got the For Derek folder. These are all things that we've seen in file shares that we want to not replicate. And also, it's challenging to apply any kind of content types or IA to this, and it creates an organizational findability challenge. It also goes against our better practices for document management from a SharePoint perspective, which we talked about in our SharePoint session. If you want to go one more, I can do that. Thinking about channels for each scenario, I liked this a little bit more. And the reason for this is that because each channel is very specific to that sort of entity, that unit of work. I don't want to call it a unit of work, because really the team should be the unit of work, different phases of those units of work. So here we've got contracts. All of your posts can be organized related to that topic. So if you're not looking for contracts, if you're not working on the contract, you can ignore that channel. If you're just doing the implementation, you can focus on that. Documents, when you add them in via a post, they automatically get added to the folder that is for that channel. And then if you wanted, Julie was talking about private channels earlier, you can potentially use private channels to secure sensitive content. The challenge there, though, with private channels is that it is a subset of the people that are already members of that team. It is not, you can't just bring somebody in to be a member of that private channel. They need to be a member of the main channel before they can be a member of the private channel. This has a lot of the same challenges, specifically around applying content types in IA. I mean, as Mark said, you can add a content type to the document library, either override the existing, the default one, or you can add additional ones. But again, it's challenging to get it to work. It's challenging to get people to use when stuff just gets dropped in there. This is still just different folders. Every channel, with the exception of the private channel, is just a different folder in the documents library. So
yeah, this is where, and Mark's going to talk about different document libraries. This is where I really, really wish that each channel had its own document library instead of being a folder, because then in this scenario that you had there, you could technically add a content type to each one of those. Yep. Like if each one of those channels was a document library, you could add a particular content type, or even two for that matter, to those. And the UI isn't terrible if you add content type into the view so people could see, oh, okay, there's two different content types in here, and actually use some metadata in those, or have a default piece of metadata. Like if you don't need extra metadata for your content type and you just want to use the content type from a search perspective, then by having those separate content types, it becomes super powerful. The problem again, though, is that if your users are using SharePoint 2 piece of things as well with the folders, I do in certain scenarios, like a scenario where I'm creating multiple team sites for like project management or whatever. So there's a project per team, or a project per legal matter, or a project for property, or whatever. I do often create sort of a very generic, inherits from documents, but generic content type that doesn't add any metadata. And I make it the default content type for the document library. And I do that simply to say, if I want to see all project documents, period, for the tenant, I have a content type that is the base content type for all of my project teams. So that's the one place where making that content type, nobody has to know about it. You remove document, you just add your custom one for whatever it is. And then you and any other content types in that site inherit from that. It does give you that sort of way that you can get everything, right?
Yep.
Julie's for president.
But Julie, that's not how they built it.
I know, but you can make it work.
They built it this other way, which someone described as a brain fart. I don't think. I think that's a reasonable description of it.
Yep.
All right. So additional libraries. Mark.
So if you're a bit more mature as an organization, you're wanting to manage your content better. The one of the problems with having different folders with different kind of content in it is that you can't have different metadata in different folders. That's not how it works. So if you want your team to be managing content that has metadata that's unique to the kind of content it is, like Derek's contracts folder or a policies folder or something like that, and you want that metadata to reflect what that object is, the better answer is to create separate document libraries in the SharePoint site. And you'll be hearing that this sort of echoes what we said was good to do in SharePoint anyway. You create a separate document library for contracts. You apply a contract content type that has some metadata that you want to track for each contract, like when does it expire, who is the contract with, that sort of stuff. So you can still do that. You can't do it from Teams. You have to go to SharePoint to do that setup, or you need to provision it that way with tools like ShareGate or Orchestree or custom code or whatever. So you've got a more sophisticated need for IA. You're going to create some additional purpose-built libraries. And then the trick is, okay, but how do we make that work in Teams? Because the Files tab in Teams is only going to take you to the Documents library. Well, you can add new tabs, or you can add or add a table for the team site's homepage. I meant a tab.
I guess I have to start editorial review.
I don't think I typed. I don't believe I typed that. But anyway, or add a tab for the team site's homepage in Teams so people can sort of navigate back into the SharePoint site. One tab for the team site's homepage means that you can sort of navigate around to all the libraries. One tab per library would mean that you'd have them sort of spread across the top of the team. So what are the pros to this? Well, you can use content types and metadata to support both processes, like what stage is this contract in, unsigned, signed, signed off, whatever. And also findability, where are the, if you wanted to search for contracts across different team sites. Your team can be customized by the members and owners by adding new tabs. That's good. That makes it sort of simple. You still have to do the building on the SharePoint side though. And then using separate tabs is actually an effective way to say this kind of stuff is different. We want you to think about it differently. People have to pay attention to what those tabs say, but if they do, it'll sort of remind them, oh, contracts, that's where that goes. So what are the cons? I think Teams is entirely intended for more transient content interactions. That's why this stuff ends up in the documents library. It's, hey, Derek, look at this contract. What do you think? And he says, that looks good. Why don't you go and send it to the client? Well, that iteration of that contract is sort of transient. It's not the final version. It's not it's just a discussion kind of version. So that's a less formal way of doing things, regardless what Microsoft says. They think Teams is the perfect UI for everything. You have to do a lot of work to make this actually more sophisticated. The Teams UI just doesn't give us great options for exposing better UI. If you have more than, say, like 4 or 5 additional libraries, they just don't fit. There's just not enough room. People tend to go toward the easiest options. If you give them a simple option that doesn't ask them for metadata, guess what they do? They just drop it into files because it's easier. And then if you want a further customization, a different front end or something, then that's going to be custom code, which may be the right answer, but Teams only gets you so far. Okay. So, Julie, I bet you have some interesting things to say about that kind of customization.
I do, sort of. Anyway, we talked about Maturity Model 500, SharePoint extensibility a lot last time, and that is definitely still something that you can do. And the nature of the Teams UI sort of makes that all still the case, right? So from a document management perspective, most of the extensibility or making things better is still got to be done in the SharePoint in the SharePoint space. It gets surfaced in Teams UI because basically every Teams tab and thereby the files view is just an iframe that's showing you the underlying SharePoint site. So if you add a custom field set or a command set to a document library or a list, that's all done in SharePoint and surfaced in Teams through the fact that iframe is just showing you the SharePoint site and thereby the extensibility is there. A couple of exceptions might be Teams message extensions. So if there are sort of tools that you want to create that you can have the user interact with, like I want to search for a document or I want to interact with a specific document and you want to create a wizard or something, you can add Teams message extensions that can then be surfaced through the command box or the message area or the compose button that allows you to surface those custom solutions that you might build. And they could be solutions that extend how you might work with documents. So that is one thing. And then, of course, Copilot agents and stuff are part of this too. So like any Copilot extensibility that can be added in the Teams UI could also then work on documents and be sort of an extensibility point for documents. But it's very specific to doing like search or modernizing or moderating over a set of documents. It's not really the interaction like we were talking about last week. So it's a little bit more simple. All right. So with that, we have some resources for you, very similar resources to last week. So if you need any of those, go ahead and click on that. And then last but not least, is this showing for everybody, this poll?
I did a test.
All right.
I did a poll.
Okay. I like it. Where do I find my Teams? Okay, I've got to answer this. Let's see. Where?
You forgot the nobody knows option.
Oh, I did forget nobody knows.
If
all of the above.
If I'm being really picky, the second one is not correct.
Should be
come on, Mark. I love it. Oh, I got 100. Good. Done. Oh, Noah. All right. People are still doing it. All right. Anyway, March 5th,
Sorry.
the craziness continues. No, it's totally fine. March 5th, the craziness continues. We're going to do one more episode on this subject. And we're calling it the intranet edition because this is around the idea of collaborating on content that you then want to publish to your organization. And so that sort of crosses the line between teams and communications sites and, you know, one-to-many and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's sort of a different scenario, and we thought we would go through that one specifically. So that one is left. It looks like most people got it all right. I like it. All right, see us live. Microsoft 365 Community Conference. We do have a $150 discount code if you want to use that. That's in Las Vegas. Mark, myself, and Derek will be there. European Collaboration Summit. That's in Dusseldorf, Germany at the end of May. Mark, myself, and Derek will be there as well. And then TechCon 365 Seattle. That's myself and Derek. We have a discount code for that. It's Simpraxis. That's in Seattle at the end of June. So join us to one of those fun events and network, be in person, in real life, be great. But we're happy to have you be here. Hope to see you the next time, and take care.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Simpraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.